In the vast expanse of the cosmos, humanity had always wondered if we were alone. That question was answered on a warm summer evening when the skies above Earth lit up with an otherworldly glow. The Zarkax, as they called themselves, arrived in their crystalline ships, towering over our cities like mountains of gleaming metal and light. They came not in peace, but with absolute confidence in their superiority. After all, they had conquered 17 other civilizations, and their biomechanical bodies had made them virtually immortal. What were we humans, with our fragile flesh and primitive technology, compared to their millennia of advancement? Their first message to Earth was simple: surrender or face extinction. They gave us 48 hours to decide, expecting us to cower like all the others before us. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had never encountered humans before. We're not just another species to be added to their collection. We're the descendants of survivors, the children of those who faced ice ages with stone tools, who crossed oceans on wooden boats, who looked at the impossible and said, "Watch us." Sarah Chen, a former military engineer turned civilian contractor, was among the first to notice something odd about our invaders. While monitoring their movements from a hidden bunker beneath Seattle, she spotted a pattern in their behavior that nobody else had picked up on. These supposed immortals had a weakness, one that was so fundamentally simple that it had been staring us in the face the whole time. They're not actually unkillable, she explained to the Emergency Defense Council, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. They're just really, really hard to kill with conventional weapons, but that's not the same as being immortal. The room fell silent as she pulled up her findings on the holographic display. Every time they regenerate, they use energy. They're like batteries, powerful, but not infinite. The global resistance movement took shape within hours. Underground networks of scientists, soldiers, and ordinary citizens began working together, sharing information across borders that had seemed so important just days ago. The Zarkax might have had superior technology, but humans had something they didn't expect: creativity born from desperation. Our first victory came in the ruins of Bangkok. A small team of resistance fighters, led by retired physics professor Dr. Sunan, managed to trap a Zarkax patrol in an electromagnetic pulse field of their own design. The aliens' regenerative abilities went into overdrive, trying to repair the constant damage to their systems. Within minutes, their energy reserves were depleted, leaving them as helpless as statues. The news spread like wildfire through secure channels. Humanity had found a way to fight back. But the Zarkax weren't about to let their reputation for invincibility be shattered by what they considered a lesser species. Their response was swift and brutal, leveling entire city blocks in retaliation for each fallen warrior. As I record this story from our hidden broadcast station, the biggest battle in human history is about to begin. Our scientists have adapted Dr. Sunan's discovery into a large-scale weapon, one that could potentially turn the tide of this war. But to deploy it, we'll need to get close to their mothership, hanging ominously above what used to be New York City. The plan is risky, maybe even suicidal, but that's never stopped humans before. After all, we're the species that looked at lightning and decided to harness it, that saw the ocean depths and chose to explore them, that gazed at the stars and built machines to reach them. Now, we're about to show these self-proclaimed immortals why you should never corner a species that turned survival into an art form. The question isn't whether we'll win, it's what these unkillable aliens will learn about humanity in their final moments. The mission to reach the mothership was christened Operation Thunderstrike, a fitting name for humanity's boldest gambit yet. Our team consisted of 12 specialists, each chosen not just for their skills, but for their uncanny ability to think on their feet. The weapon we carried, dubbed the Pulsar Ray, looked deceptively simple: a collection of modified EMP generators housed in what appeared to be ordinary shipping containers. Dr. Sunan's discovery had been refined and enhanced by a global think tank of scientists working around the clock. They found that the Zarkax's regenerative abilities weren't just their strength, they were their greatest vulnerability. Each time they healed, their energy consumption increased exponentially. If we could force them to regenerate continuously, their supposedly infinite power sources would drain like water through a sieve. Sarah Chen, now our tactical lead, spent countless hours studying the aliens' patrol patterns around their mothership. They're creatures of habit, she explained during our final briefing in the underground bunker. Despite all their advanced technology, they still think in straight lines. They never expect anyone to do something completely irrational, which is exactly what we're going to do. The plan was audacious. We would use their own overconfidence against them. The Zarkax had become so convinced of their invulnerability that they'd grown careless. They didn't bother to scan for smaller vessels anymore, considering them harmless against their superior shields. This arrogance would be their undoing. Our first step involved a series of coordinated diversions across the globe. Resistance cells in Sydney, Cairo, and Rio de Janeiro launched simultaneous attacks on Zarkax outposts. It wasn't meant to cause serious damage. We just needed to draw their attention away from New York long enough to get our team in position. The Resistance had converted an old subway maintenance tunnel into our approach route. As we moved through the darkness, the rumbling of alien patrol ships overhead sent cascades of dust raining down on us. Each step brought us closer to either humanity's salvation or its final defeat. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on us harder than the hundreds of tons of concrete and earth above our heads. Dr. Sunan's latest analysis had revealed something else about our invaders, something that gave us hope. The Zarkax weren't just physically connected to their technology. They were psychologically dependent on it. The thought of being vulnerable, even for a moment, terrified them. It was why they'd spent millennia perfecting their regenerative abilities, trying to achieve true immortality. As we approached our target position beneath the mothership, our sensors picked up increased activity above. The diversions had worked, almost too well. The Zarkax were redirecting their forces globally, leaving their command center more exposed than we'd ever seen it. But something felt off about their response. "They're being too predictable," Sarah whispered, studying the tactical display. "Even for them." The concern in her voice made everyone pause. Had we underestimated them? Were they aware of our plan and simply playing along, leading us into a trap? Before we could fully process these doubts, our perimeter sensors lit up with warnings. Something massive was moving through the tunnel system, heading straight for us. Something that shouldn't have been there. The Zarkax had never shown any interest in the underground network before. We counted on that assumption for our entire approach strategy. Now, trapped between the unknown threat approaching through the darkness and the heavily guarded mothership above, we had seconds to decide: proceed with our original plan, knowing it might be compromised, or risk everything on an impromptu alternative. The fate of our species hung on what we did next, and the clock was ticking. The tunnel's emergency lights cast an eerie red glow as we pressed ourselves against the cold walls. The rumbling grew closer, accompanied by a sound we'd never heard before, a low-frequency hum that made our teeth ache and our bones vibrate. Sarah pulled out a modified thermal scanner, and what she saw made her face pale. "They've developed something new," she whispered, showing us the display. The approaching signature was unlike anything in our database, a massive heat bloom that seemed to shift and pulse like a living thing. The Zarkax had adapted, learning from every encounter with humanity. We'd known they were capable of rapid technological evolution, but this was beyond our worst predictions. Dr. Sunan quickly analyzed the data from his portable workstation. The energy pattern suggests they've found a way to shield their core systems from our EMP technology, he explained, his fingers flying over the holographic keys. But look at the power consumption. It's off the charts. They're burning through resources at an unsustainable rate. That's when it hit me. The Zarkax weren't just trying to stop us. They were scared. Every advancement they'd made, every new weapon they'd developed, was born from their growing fear of humanity. We had done something none of their previous conquests had managed. We'd made them doubt their immortality. A plan formed in Sarah's mind as she studied the tunnel schematics. "If we can't overload their systems from the outside," she said, her eyes lighting up with that dangerous gleam I'd learned to recognize, "maybe we can force them to overload themselves." She quickly outlined her idea, and despite its risks, it was brilliant in its simplicity. We split into 3 teams. The first would continue with the original mission, heading toward the mothership with the pulse array. The second would create a series of carefully calculated cave-ins, forcing our mysterious pursuer into progressively smaller tunnels. The third team, led by Sarah and Dr. Sunan, would modify our remaining EMP devices into something the Zarkax wouldn't expect. Time became a blur of calculated chaos, the sound of collapsing tunnels mixed with the alien hum of our pursuer. Each time we sealed off a path, the temperature in the remaining tunnels rose dramatically. The Zarkax machine was burning through power trying to maintain its protective field in the increasingly confined space. Above ground, our global diversion had escalated into a full-scale battle. The resistance fighters had discovered that the redirected Zarkax forces were operating at reduced power. They diverted too much energy to their new underground hunter. It was the first crack in their seemingly perfect tactical control. As we maneuvered our unseen enemy through the labyrinth of tunnels, Dr. Sunan's readings confirmed our theory. The Zarkax machine's power consumption was reaching critical levels, but we were running out of tunnels to collapse, and the temperature had risen so high that our protective gear was beginning to fail. The final phase of our improvised plan brought us to an abandoned subway station directly beneath the mothership. The chamber's vaulted ceiling was our only barrier to our original target, and now we had something even more dangerous beneath us. Sarah looked at the modified pulse array, then at the readings from the approaching Zarkax machine. Everything hinged on precise timing and a theory we couldn't test. The chamber's ancient tiles began to crack from the heat as our pursuer approached. Through the shimmering air, we caught our first glimpse of what had been hunting us, a writhing mass of liquid metal and energy, more horrifying than anything we'd imagined. But in that horror, we saw our opportunity. The Zarkax had built the perfect weapon, not realizing they had also created the perfect conductor for what we had planned. The liquid metal construct filled the chamber with a blinding light, its surface rippling like mercury under a strobing sun. As it approached, our modified sensors detected something unexpected. It wasn't just one Zarkax machine, but hundreds of their consciousness cores merged into a single entity. They had sacrificed their individual forms to create something they thought would be unstoppable. Dr. Sunan's hands trembled as he checked the readings. "This changes everything," he said, his voice barely audible over the deafening hum. "They're not just sharing power. They're sharing experiences, adapting in real time to everything they've learned about us." The implications were staggering. Each victory humanity had achieved, each weakness we exposed, had been analyzed and countered within this collective consciousness. Sarah quickly adjusted our plan. The pulse array alone wouldn't be enough. We needed to turn their shared consciousness against them. "Their greatest strength is also their greatest weakness," she explained. "They're so connected that they can't hide anything from each other, including their fear." That's when we received an unexpected transmission from the Global Resistance Network. Our diversionary attacks had revealed something crucial. The Zarkax ships worldwide were behaving erratically, their movements suggesting internal conflict. The aliens were divided on how to handle humanity's continued resistance. Some wanted to resort to planetary bombardment, while others feared it would only prove our species' point about their vulnerability. The massive entity before us suddenly projected a holographic image, a visual representation of their collective thoughts. We saw flashes of their previous conquests, but more importantly, we saw their growing uncertainty. Every human victory, no matter how small, had created a crack in their unified confidence. They had merged into this new form not out of strength, but out of desperation. As if sensing our realization, the entity launched its attack. Tendrils of liquid metal shot toward us with incredible speed, but they moved with an almost hesitant precision. The Zarkax were trying to capture, not kill. They wanted to understand how we had accomplished the impossible, how we had made immortals doubt. Sarah's team initiated their modified EMP devices, but instead of trying to overwhelm the entity's defenses, they targeted specific frequencies. The chamber filled with intersecting energy waves that matched the resonance of the Zarkax's shared consciousness. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The liquid metal surface began to ripple violently, forming patterns that looked almost like written language. Dr. Sunan rushed to decode it, his eyes widening as the translation appeared on his screen. "It's not just communication, he gasped. It's memory, their earliest memories. We're seeing something they've hidden even from themselves. Through the chaos of shifting metal and energy, we glimpsed the truth that the Zarkax had buried beneath millennia of conquest. Their quest for immortality hadn't begun with strength, but with fear. Fear of a long-forgotten defeat by another species, one that had shown them the true meaning of resilience. The Zarkax hadn't become conquerors because they were invincible. They had sought invincibility because they had once been conquered. The entity's form became increasingly unstable as this buried memory surfaced. Its light pulsed erratically, and the temperature in the chamber rose to nearly unbearable levels. We had unknowingly tapped into something far more powerful than their technological weaknesses. We had exposed their psychological vulnerability. But before we could process this revelation, the chamber's ceiling began to crack. The mothership above had detected the energy fluctuations and was powering up its main weapon. We had seconds to decide: pursue our original plan against the mothership, or risk everything on this new understanding of our enemy's true nature. The choice would determine not just the outcome of this battle, but the future of both our species. In that crucial moment, Sarah made a decision that would reshape the course of the war. Instead of attacking, she stepped forward and did something unprecedented. She deactivated her protective gear. The searing heat hit her like a wall, but she stood firm, facing the writhing mass of liquid metal. "You're not the first to fear extinction," she called out, her voice steady despite the pain. "But you might be the first to learn from it." The entity's surface rippled, forming complex patterns that Dr. Sunnen frantically translated. Through their shared consciousness, the Zarkax were experiencing something they hadn't felt in millennia: recognition. In humanity's desperate but determined resistance, they saw reflections of their own ancient past, before they had hidden their vulnerability behind the facade of immortality. Suddenly, the chamber filled with a deafening screech as the mothership's weapon began powering up above us. The ceiling was splitting apart, threatening to crush us all. But instead of retreating, the liquid metal entity surged upward, forming a protective barrier between us and the falling debris. It wasn't just protecting itself, it was protecting us. That's when Dr. Sunnen's modified pulse array activated, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. The electromagnetic frequencies matched perfectly with the entity's communication patterns, creating a moment of perfect synchronization. Through this connection, both species shared something profound: the raw, unfiltered experience of their greatest fears and strongest hopes. The Zarkax experienced the human spirit firsthand: our capacity to face impossible odds, our ability to find strength in vulnerability, and our willingness to risk everything for a chance at peace. In return, we glimpsed the truth of their civilization, how their quest for immortality had started as a defense against genocide, but had slowly transformed them into the very thing they had once feared. The mothership's weapon reached full power, its energy signature threatening to tear the chamber apart. But before it could fire, something extraordinary happened. The liquid metal entity transmitted a signal that rippled through every Zarkax ship on Earth. One by one, their weapons powered down. The massive collective consciousness had made a choice that their individual selves had been too afraid to make. The entity began to separate, individual Zarkax consciousness cores emerging from the liquid metal mass. But they were different now. The perfect, uniform shells they had hidden behind for so long were gone. Instead, their bodies showed marks of their true history, wearing their vulnerability as a badge of honor rather than a source of shame. The first of them approached Sarah, its surface still flickering with residual energy. "We forgot," it communicated through Dr. Sunnen's translator, "that true immortality isn't about never falling. It's about always rising again." The words echoed through the chamber, carrying the weight of a civilization's redemption. As the dust settled and the chamber's temperature began to normalize, we received reports from around the globe. The Zarkax ships were landing, not as conquerors, but as equals ready to engage in dialogue. Their quest for absolute invulnerability had ended, replaced by something far more valuable: the understanding that strength and vulnerability were not opposites, but partners in the dance of survival. Sarah looked at the transformed beings before us, then at the data showing the mothership's weapons powering down worldwide. So, she said with a hint of a smile, "I guess neither of us was as unkillable as we thought." The Zarkax's response came not in words, but in a subtle shift of their surfaces that Dr. Sunnan would later translate as laughter, the first time they had expressed such an emotion in over 1,000 years. But as we began to process our victory, a final transmission from the mothership caught everyone's attention. There was something else, something the Zarkax had discovered during their moment of shared consciousness with humanity. A signal coming from deep space, suggesting we weren't the only ones who had learned this lesson. The real challenge, it seemed, was just beginning. The months following what became known as the Convergence marked a transformative period for both species. The Zarkax, freed from their obsession with invulnerability, began sharing their vast knowledge with humanity. But rather than simply giving us their technology, they worked alongside us, combining their advanced understanding with human creativity and resilience. Dr. Sunnan and a team of Zarkax scientists focused on decoding the mysterious deep space signal. Its pattern was unlike anything either species had encountered before, yet it carried familiar undertones of both human determination and Zarkax precision. "It's like looking at a message written in 2 languages at once," Dr. Sunnan explained during one of our joint briefings. "Whoever sent it knew we'd need to work together to understand it." Sarah, now heading the newly formed Earth-Zarkax Relations Council, spent countless hours documenting the changes in both societies. The Zarkax had begun incorporating elements of human culture into their own, particularly our ability to find strength in imperfection. In return, they helped us understand that progress doesn't always mean conquering our limitations. Sometimes it means accepting them and finding new ways forward. The crystalline ships that had once terrorized our skies were transformed into shared research centers, their threatening silhouettes now symbolizing cooperation rather than conquest. Inside one such facility, I watched as human children taught young Zarkax about laughter, while their elders demonstrated how to harness energy from quantum fluctuations. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But perhaps the most profound change was in how both species viewed the concept of survival. The Zarkax learned that their quest for physical immortality had almost cost them their spiritual essence, while humans realized that our greatest strength lay not in our ability to fight, but in our capacity to adapt and grow through understanding. As for the deep space signal, its message became clearer with each passing day. It spoke of other civilizations that had faced similar crossroads, species that had chosen cooperation over conquest, understanding over dominance. The signal wasn't just a message. It was an invitation to join a larger community of beings who had learned the same lesson we had. Sarah and her Zarkax counterpart, whose name translated roughly to Seeker of New Paths, often discussed the implications of this discovery. "We spent millennia thinking we had to become unkillable to survive," the Zarkax communicated, their surface rippling with newfound emotion. "But true survival isn't about never changing. It's about changing in the right ways." The signal from deep space grew stronger, suggesting that whatever waited out there was drawing closer. But this time, neither humans nor Zarkax approached the unknown with fear. We had learned that the strongest shield isn't made of technology or force fields. It's built from understanding, cooperation, and the willingness to face our fears together. As I record this final part of our story, Earth's night sky looks different than it did before the invasion. The Zarkax ships now orbit alongside our satellites, their crystalline surfaces reflecting starlight in a peaceful display. But more eyes are turned toward deep space, where the mysterious signal beckons us toward a new chapter in both our histories. We don't know what challenges await us out there in the vast cosmic ocean, but we do know this: whatever comes next, we'll face it not as separate species trying to prove our invincibility, but as partners who understand that our greatest strength lies in our ability to learn from each other, grow through adversity, and find courage in our shared vulnerability. After all, as both humans and Zarkax now understand, the most powerful force in the universe isn't the ability to avoid death. It's the wisdom to embrace life in all its imperfect, beautiful forms.